Today, myself and Eric Bienfor are going to talk about the first 3 rounds of drafts, not just for Underdog, not just for DraftKings, but also for drafters. Maybe talk about how they differ in each format, what you should be doing, who you should be taking, who you should not be taking. There's a couple of names on that list that are pretty interesting as well. So without further ado, let's do it. It's always good when StreamYard decides to delay stuff so that you just go into an absolute panic and you're like, oh shit, is it going to play or not? So then you start clicking buttons, it starts turning on and off. But regardless, here we are. Myself, Eric, how's your day going?
It's wonderful. These are incredible first world problems, but that is like when you're doing this, multiple times a week, it is absolutely terrifying. And like you said, the level of panic is like, I'm trying to describe it, I can't think of an analogy off the top of my head, but like it's so meaningless, like in the grand scheme of life. But in that moment, you're like, my world is ending. This is over. I'm so embarrassed by this. And like I said, it's absolutely nothing, but you're just like, please work. Please, God, work.
It's dropping like a plastic water bottle that's fully sealed, right? And you still panic to catch it. It doesn't matter. Nothing's going to happen. Yes. But you still try to catch it because that's just instinctively what you do. And so you start trying to fix things and you make it worse. But here we are on a Tuesday night. I'm wearing a beanie for what I think is the last time for a few months because it's starting to get real warm out, which means that football's starting to come. And we are going to talk about the first 3 rounds of these best ball drafts. And we're going to hit on some interesting names. We hit on some of these players last night, and it made me go look up a few things, particularly with some of the running backs. So we put Tony Pollard on the cover, and I kind of wanted to dig into his injury a little bit more to see if that is a concern we should have based on the stuff about Breece Hall and stuff. But what I found is we basically have nothing to worry about in terms of this injury at all. I'm not sure if you looked into this at all yourself.
Not too deeply.
So it's a broken fibula or tibula, whichever one's in the leg. One of those bones that was broken. He already had surgery for it in January. The recommended time before you can start running again is 12 weeks, which we've already passed at this point. The Cowboys paid him a lot of money. They're still hoping to extend him long term. It just seems like, with barring any like crazy setbacks, it's all systems go for Tony Pollard. So it's making me feel real good about how much I've been smashing him in these drafts. And now I'm like, I'm just going to do it even more.
Yeah, he's obviously like you said, he's the poster boy, but I think he's a great kind of a poster boy. He's kind of almost where you start, I think, some of this conversation, particularly as it pertains to like second, third round. The first round is maybe a little bit more straightforward to most people, but Pollard is kind of the leader of this group that is, I'll call them second round players, but a ginormous tier in that, to me, in like almost the late first, really, maybe say pick 10, 11, depending upon exactly how you feel about the late first round, all the way down through early to even sometimes mid second, where that's where I do think this conversation is important. I think some of the ADP might shake up a little bit over the course of the summer. We still have some free agents. Of course, there may be some injuries. There may be some news that changes things. But I think it's important that we had this conversation now and really dug into not just like, right, who our favorite players are, because that's important. But at the end of the day, that's a little bit of personal preference. I think sometimes we get a little over aggressive, I guess I would say, but definitely overconfident in our ability to decipher between elite fantasy players. And so I don't think this whole conversation is just like, you have to draft Tony Pollard, you have to draft Breece Hall or Nick Chubb, and I like all these guys. Not as much Breece. I know we talked about that yesterday, so go watch that show if you want some Jets and Breece conversation. But right, like deciphering between Tyreek Hill and Cooper Kupp, to me, is a little bit of a fool's errand. You can determine how much of each guy you want to take, right? What kind of teams you want to draft them on, who you want to draft them with. And all of that is extremely important. But I think wading our way through, not just like draft this guy, fade this guy, particularly this year. And I think that's the big theme for me, is that even last year, where we continue to get a more efficient market, particularly in best ball on Underdog, right? A very smart group of drafters in these streets. But last year, there was quite a few guys I actually thought like that were first round, second round guys that I didn't know really deserve to be there that much. I think the market has shifted drastically, and some people are a little bit shocked by that. And Pollard is a great, as the dogs are playing behind me, Pollard is kind of a guy, Breece, Ramondre, these guys who maybe were more of third round ish or even fourth round picks historically, or excuse me, were like 1-2 turn ish picks who are now going at the 2-3 turn, while the wide receivers, right? These good Lord, these second these second wide receivers. 1 second.
Yeah. So what I'll say is, going off of some of the stuff that you brought up, is when we're talking about like just don't draft this player or draft this player, it's the context of the way the draft is going this year. So to that point, if you're taking the second, third round running backs, with the way the wide receivers are going off the board, it really, really like impacts what you can do later in the draft, starting generally around that 6th round. That's where it gets like the 5th round already starts to get dicey in these drafts with wide receiver. The 6th round feels like we're already like dart throwing. Whereas in years past, it might have been the 10th, the 11th round, 9th round, where we felt like the wide receivers fell off a bit more. Maybe last year was like the 8th or so. I still remember being really confident in the 7th round last year, because I was either smashing Devonta Smith or Christian Kirk and felt great about it every single draft.
Devonta Smith was a 7th round. Like yeah. Think about that. He now goes late second, as I believe, late second, 2-3 turn, whatever you want to call it, as I believe he should. Same thing. Jalen Waddle didn't go in the 7th, but let's call it the 4th or the 3-4 turn. Now he's mid second round.
Yep. That
what you were saying about those later picks is this conversation about the first 3 rounds. We often do, and who doesn't? We're human. We fall into this trap of saying I kind of do think Tony Pollard is a little more of a 1-2 turn pick, a late first rounder almost.
Mm-hmm.
But like, it's not just Tony Pollard being a late first rounder. I have to take him in every draft, because there's 18 picks and there's all of that. Like, if I get to the 5th round this is also kind of true, and I don't like wide receivers already in the 5th round, that means something to me in the first 3 rounds, right? So maybe I do like Tony Pollard more than Jalen Waddle or whatever. I'm not saying that's right or wrong or even necessarily how I feel, but the rest of the draft impacts these first 3 rounds. And I think we fall into this trap, and I've seen a fair amount of it just like across the space. It's May, dude. We're all just getting into this, right? So everybody's not fully fleshed out. But like, when you get to that 6th round, like you said, that 7th round, we don't have Devonta Smith anymore. We don't have those guys. Right. It gets thin really quickly, and quarterbacks are pushed up, right? We'll definitely talk about the quarterbacks with them being in the 2nd round, but all the quarterbacks got pushed up, all the wide receivers got pushed up. So naturally running backs have to fall, but that doesn't just mean because in a vacuum, Tony Pollard is a preferred pick to Devonta Smith. I have to construct the whole team. And in best ball specifically, I have to draft the whole portfolio of teams, right? If I'm drafting hundreds or even like 25, 50 teams in best ball, I'm playing the 20 max on DraftKings. You can do whatever you want risk management wise. You just want to go all in on Tony Pollard, have at it, go have fun. But like, you do have to be cognizant of what the rest of the player pool looks like. And so I think that's kind of like a good intro to this conversation, where it's like, I'm sitting here telling you, I think Tony Pollard in a vacuum is probably undervalued where he goes. He's the poster boy. He makes for a really intriguing conversation in these first 3 rounds. But it can't just be about Tony Pollard versus Jalen Waddle or Nick Chubb versus Devonta Smith. You have to take a whole macro approach to that draft, to the whole player pool, and to how you want to put together an entire portfolio of teams.
Yeah, it becomes the roster construction. Yes, Tony Pollard's a great pick. Yes, Ramondre Stevenson's a great pick. We know all those guys are like fantastic picks, but how does it impact your roster build? And it's not even just for running back and wide receiver, because let's just say for the hell of it, you take Ja'Marr Chase, right? And then you double tap Tony Pollard and Ramondre Stevenson. That's your 2-3 turn. So now you've gone Ja'Marr Chase, Tony Pollard, Ramondre Stevenson as your first 3 picks. And that's what we're talking about, the first 3 rounds today, and how that impacts the rest of your draft. It makes it a hell of a lot harder to take a quarterback now. I don't think you can touch tight end for a while. So it doesn't just impact the like elite skill positions of running back and wide receiver, but now you got to load up at wide receiver probably the next 3 rounds in general, and you can make adjustments to this as you go. But once you take a quarterback, like if you do decide to do that, Trevor Lawrence, Calvin Ridley stack that we were talking about yesterday, after going with double RB, yeah, Chase, Calvin Ridley feels great, but who's your third wide receiver going to be? Probably someone okay. But that 4th, 5th wide receiver, now you're talking about Darnell Mooney as your 5th wide receiver a lot of times. And I don't mind Darnell Mooney. Like, that's not a knock on him. He's still a guy that I'm tapping. But it gets a lot more sketchy when Darnell Mooney's your 5th instead of your 6th or 7th wide receiver. And you have to count on him a little bit more than you did as a 6th or 7th round or 6th or 7th pick on your team. So I think that is the to me, with the first 3 rounds, like the ultimate number one thing you need to be considering for your roster construction as you go forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that basically the 2 pillars of how you approach drafts right now are how you're handling wide. And I think this is kind of has been the case the last couple of years, whether people would like to admit it or not. The wide receiver thing is not just a bit. Of course, we like to joke around about running backs and wide receivers, but the market, where the market has truly gotten the most efficient, in my opinion, relative to how it's been in the past, is at wide receiver, particularly this year. Like last year, if you thought it was bad, this year, in terms of like how quickly it falls off, this year is like that on Barry Bonds level steroids. Like it is crazy how fast it falls out. Some of the people in the chat are throwing out some of those like mid-ish round wide receivers, and I like some of those guys. You mentioned Tony in the chat. Josh has mentioned Gabe, who I'm going to draft again as well. Please God, don't trade for DeAndre Hopkins. And I really like Hollywood again. Like I said, Rob mentioned Kadarius Toney, but there's only a few of them, right? I also agree with Mike that on DK, especially, Deontay Johnson does go pretty late. If you watch the very first DraftKings draft that Rob and I did, and it's posted on the YouTube on our YouTube channel that you can go watch later, we actually drafted Deontay Johnson and talked him up quite a bit on DraftKings. But on Underdog, Deontay's okay. Like, I don't hate him where he goes, but I don't love him. And that's the point, is that Devonta Smith won the Heisman and was on an Eagles offense that everyone was excited for, right? Mm-hmm. Especially after they traded for AJ Brown. That was the level of wide receiver we were getting in the 7th round. Remember a few years ago when Diggs got traded to the Bills? That was like where you're getting Stefon Diggs.
Yeah.
Stefon Diggs has gone in the 1st round for multiple years now, as he should. Mm-hmm. I know, right? It was a new team. We didn't know who Josh Allen was exactly just yet, but think about how good Stefon Diggs was. That's not the type of player we're talking about at wide receiver in those ranges anymore. You can squint and you can like these guys, and I do like some of them, but none of those guys have, like, in my personal opinion, I will eat my L next time this year or mid-year if I'm wrong. None of those guys have like this Cooper Kupp level legendary season in them. These guys are role players on your fantasy team, right? These guys are not Devonta Smith level breakout who goes to the 2nd round next year. Like, I was drafting Gabe last year. I like Hollywood. I like Deontay. I like Tony. Are they going to be 2nd round picks next year? I don't even really see that in the range of outcomes. Maybe like the 99th percentile, but it's not really there. And so you have to take all that into account. You combine it with the quarterbacks, right? Tight end has actually gotten pushed down a little bit, so that might offset it a smidge, other than Travis Kelce. But quarterbacks, right? 3 in the second round, Lamar in the third, Fields-ish in the third, Burrow up there, Lawrence up there. Deshaun Watson was one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL last year, and we're taking him in the 6th round, 7th round. It's just kind of crazy. There's a bunch more quarterbacks going earlier. You have to take all that into account before you say even, how am I attacking these first 3 rounds, which is, of course, what we're going to get into the rest of the show. But I think it was important to be like, when I start to talk about some of these things, and I might say, oh, shocker, Eric's likes wide receivers. It's not just because I don't actually like Jalen Waddle more than Tony Pollard, but we need to have conversations like that. And then how you're putting your teams together because of how the rest of the draft looks. I don't want Deontay Johnson as my wide receiver too, right? God forbid you take an elite quarterback and a couple early running backs. Maybe you dip your toes into George Kittle or something. Now you got Gabe Davis, wide receiver 2. I'm sorry, I don't want that. I don't want Darnell Mooney, wide receiver 3 or 4, because I'm not certain you can win one of these best ball tournaments that way.
Yeah, one of my favorite comments in the chat right now is how Deontay Johnson's going to have positive touchdown regression. Well, positive touchdown regression for Deontay Johnson this year is 1 touchdown. I'm not trying to make fun of you, Mike, but it's just yeah, he is going to score a touchdown this year, you would assume. So but that
would be some legendary shit if he did not score a touchdown again this year, by the way.
Yeah, it would be I would love it. I actually kind of want to bet on it, right? I just want to go to a sports book and be like, can I just bet $5 on Deontay Johnson not scoring a touchdown again this year? Just whatever odds you want to give me that make roughly any sense, I'll take.
It's gotta be massive, right? You got that's gotta be a big win. We should be able to max BBM with a Deontay Johnson to not score a touchdown for 2 straight seasons.
Right. And now I actually have Gotham trying to play with me, which usually does not happen on streams, but here we are.
He heard the goddamn shit show going on behind me, and now of course they're all tired, so they've switched roles. I do want to start talking about the first 3 rounds. And what I wanted to kind of ask you as we start with these first 3 rounds, I want to start at the top of the first round. Shocker, right? But to me, this is the easiest part of the draft, which it usually is. But last year was actually at least a remotely interesting conversation, I thought, in the top 3 to 5 or whatever. Jonathan Taylor was going first for most of last year, if everyone remembers. And I don't think we don't usually get the 101 being up for debate. Actually, it doesn't happen very often. And I think it was last year.
Yeah.
Whether you preferred CMC or you preferred Cooper Kupp, or Jefferson ended up flipping Kupp because of the Stafford injury, Jamar Chase, there were multiple options I thought were viable. I think you could have probably made an argument for Travis Kelce, even at the 101 last year, certainly in Superflex or something. This year, I'm not saying there's not a debate for 101, but I do think Justin Jefferson is pretty clearly the 101. And then I also think there's a top 5. You can order them however you want, but in my opinion, there is a top 5, maybe top 6, depending upon how you feel about Kelce. If Kelce were 2 years younger, it probably wouldn't be a debate. It is Justin Jefferson, Christian McCaffrey, Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, and Cooper Kupp. And I would listen to people that maybe wanted to throw someone else in there, Kelce, Eckler, whatever. That's fine. But to me, it's a very clear top 5. And so, again, that informs the rest of how we draft these first 3 rounds as well. If I know that my top 5 is locked in and I'm not getting cute there, I think that's like I said, a really important factor into how you handle these first 3 rounds. And of course, how you handle, the entirety of the draft.
Well, I don't think it's quite as simple as that this year, and I want it to be. But if you remember last year, I was taking Jamar Chase sometimes at 101 overall. I was mixing that 101 up quite a bit. I can't imagine I'm going to do it this year. It's going to be Justin Jefferson pretty much every time. That's 90% of the time the only way you're going to get your exposure to him. You're going to have a couple people that take CMC 1 overall, which was a thought I was workshopping right when drafts opened this year, like a month or 2 ago. But when you see the way the wide receivers were going, I quickly threw that out the window. Like it just, you can't do it in my opinion. And it went from me trying to be overweight on CMC to I don't know how often I'll be drafting CMC this year because of the wide receiver window. And it's like the thought experiment becomes, and we'll talk a little more about this when we hit second, third round, but just to emphasize, if you take CMC in the first, right, you're taking like Chris Olave, Jalen Waddle as your second wide receiver. And then you can
Olave, I see a lot. Olave is a kind of that guy that just falls right into that. You're like, well, I can't take another running back. Olave is the best guy available.
Yeah. So then the thought experiment becomes, would you prefer having CMC, Chris Olave? Nothing wrong with Olave, by the way. I do like him. Or would you rather have Ja'Marr Chase, Tony Pollard, Ja'Marr Chase, Ramondre Stevenson, Ja'Marr Chase, Breece Hall, if you still like Breece Hall? I mean, to me, it's a no-brainer. If you want to go wide receiver running back, it is so easy to do the Ja'Marr Chase experiment at the 102. And also now you are upping your Ja'Marr Chase ownership again, like I was talking about last year. So you're up to 12, 13, 14% Ja'Marr Chase. You are reduced on CMC, which I don't love, but just the combinations of the players you're getting. So I'm indirectly kind of fading CMC this year. It's not intentional in terms of I'm not like, you should never draft CMC in drafts because he's the worst running back in the NFL. It's because of the way my team comes out. And even if you go wide receiver, you're talking Chase, Waddle, DK Metcalf, Chase, Waddle, Olave. Like it's a pretty sick wide receiver room to go there. So when it comes to the top few picks, and I'm with you, I'm not taking Kelsey really at the 4 or 5 turn. I'm Kupp over Hill right now. So my Kupp ownership's probably going to be over Hill's a bit. And call me, a tinfoil hat wearing guy, but when Hill comes out and he's already talking about his retirement, I get nervous. Like when a player starts talking about they're getting ready to retire, it's like, dude, he's not playing for a contract anymore, if that's what he's saying. And not that he's not a great football player, but I don't know, that stuff just always gets me a little nervous. So I'm a little more Kupp than Hill. And now we're talking about the top 5 picks. And now I'm concentrating my top 5 on 3 different players. My Jefferson exposure should relatively be even. My Ja'Marr Chase ownership should be up. And my Cooper Kupp ownership should be up. So I get to bet on 3 of the 5 players that I actually like. Right.
More than the field. You're still getting your right. And maybe you're under on CMC. Pray he falls a little bit, but it's not like you're going to have 0 of those guys. And again, how you handle exactly your exposure, I think, is something that I hate to be like preachy about. Sometimes that's just naturally how it goes, because I have a belief in that there is no edge necessarily in a vacuum in saying I'm going to take all Ja'Marr Chase and 0 Justin Jefferson. Like I know that you did last year. Last year was a little bit different. We have another season of data, and Justin Jefferson was Justin Jefferson last year. But that is a personal risk and portfolio management preference. That is not like necessarily you, right? There are levers we can pull to gain edges in best ball. And that changes every single year, whether it's roster construction, whether it is an individual player, those kinds of things. But generally speaking, just saying, I'm going to take this bet of I'm going to only draft Ja'Marr Chase and not Justin Jefferson is really just taking a high variance, high risk approach to your portfolio, which is totally fine, right? Like, dude, I come from DFS. That's how I play DFS actually is like, well, I'm just going to if I multi-enter a DFS slate, I usually go in, I'm like, I'm going to play 100% Mahomes stacks today. And if it fails, it fails. If it wins, I'm going to have a bunch of teams that have a shot, right? And so that's a totally fine approach. It's just the DFS. I can do it again every day. When I lose, I can play the show. I can chase my losses in the showdown slate. In best ball, I can't quite do that. So it's just a personal risk preference thing, as opposed to like, I think sometimes people will come in and say, oh, I believe to the Tyreek example, like pound the table. You have to take Cooper Kupp over Tyreek. It's like, you can have that thought, but it's not really an edge, because at the end of the day, the real math is that they're both awesome. They both could be the guy you need. They both could be the wide receiver one. Frankly, halfway through the season, they were. We look back and we see what Justin Jefferson did. Kupp and Tyreek were the top 2 fantasy wide receivers through like 10 weeks last year. And not just in fantasy points, in like usage, targets, air yards, absolutely everything. And so it's like, we have to, that's also kind of an important thing of the first few rounds, is you can have your preferences, you can manage your teams however the heck you want to do it, as you should. We're doing this for fun, right? We're sickos and we're trying to win money, but also like, if you're drafting now, you're listening to fantasy football content in May, clearly you enjoy this, so do it how you will most enjoy it, but also understand that, like, again, Jalen Waddle versus Tony Pollard in a vacuum is not an edge. It is a coin flip, basically,
right.
So
right.
just understand that it's a portfolio type of thing. And we'll definitely talk about some of that, how I personally want to handle my portfolio, how you may want to take, like last year, more Ja'Marr Chase. I'm pretty much just kind of peanut, but I think I'm going to get more Kupp because I'm just a little higher. Like, I have him ranked 3rd. I'm not going to take him 3rd probably. And I'm going to get less CMC. To your point, my personal approach is going to be exactly what you just said. Probably going to be under CMC. I'm going to, just because of ADP, I'm going to have a little more Kupp, and I'm probably going to be right about the field of Tyreek, Jefferson, and Chase. And then I'm going to try to win it elsewhere, which, fading CMC, or being under on CMC is not a very fun feeling, but it's just, I only have so many teams to draft, and that's how I prefer to do it. But I'm not going to sit here and say fading, pound the table, create a YouTube video that says you have to fade Christian McCaffrey this year in best ball. Like, I don't think that's It does.
If you guys see that short come out, don't stress. It's probably just me.
We got many days of shorts to create for the next few months. I imagine we'll run into the you have to fade CMC one at some point, but you obviously get what I'm saying, and that's a really important note. And I wanted to talk about it as it relates to the top 5, because I think we can do a lot of things after the top 5 where we can maybe start to pull some levers that are actually creating some edges, or at least doing something to try to get a tactical advantage. Whereas in the top 5, like, we all have preferences, but I don't really think it's like any substantial edge on the field in that top 5.
Yeah, and just to round out this argument and kind of finish it up, the Chase Jefferson thing last year, if you took Chase before Jefferson, you were still going to be in enough drafts where, so I did that in every draft for, let's say, Best Ball Mania. And I think my Ja'Marr Chase ownership was something around 17%, but I still had 6% of Justin Jefferson for the drafts that he fell after Ja'Marr Chase. So I was getting like a ADP difference. So my Ja'Marr Chase teams that were 6% were still a little different than everybody else's Ja'Marr Chase's teams when he was taken, a pick or 2 earlier. So that was last year. You can't do that this year. You take Ja'Marr Chase 1, you're never going to get Justin Jefferson after Ja'Marr Chase, right? Like, it's going to be like a 99 out of 100 chance. Basically, I've seen it one time. And all the drafts I've done so far. So
a couple times on DraftKings, right? You might get, how DraftKings goes. You might get it a couple times on DraftKings, but it ain't happening on Underdog.
So that's not in the equation this year. What is in the equation is the Cooper Kupp one. So you can take Cooper Kupp before Tyreek Hill. And guess what? You're going to be in enough drafts that Tyreek Hill actually goes before Cooper Kupp or whatever, the vice versa, so that you're still getting both. So it's understanding how people are drafting, it's understanding what you're looking to do, and it's understanding what you want to be overweight, underweight on. But most importantly, it's about what your roster construction is going to be with those top 5 or 6 picks, and actually the first 10 picks, I think, because I think it's pretty clear that you have to go wide receiver unless it's CMC in the first 10 picks. Like, if you want to take CMC, fine, that's fine. But other than that, it might even be more than the first 10. It might be the first 12. Like, the first round, you might just have to pound wide receiver.
Yeah.
And there's different ways to do it or whatever, but it just feels like that's kind of what's lining up to this year. And it's crazy because you think 5 years ago, 8, 9 of the first 12 picks probably would have been running backs. It's just the way that it used to be.
Now
and
we
your
barely
home
have
leagues are still going to be like that too.
We barely have one in the first round. You might have you'll definitely have some drafts, right? Obviously, some of us and some of our friends and family drafts where you might only get Christian McCaffrey in the first round. So it's a very stark difference. I do just want to put a bow on it with Lion's comment. It's risky to not. This is a totally true statement and kind of what we were trying to outline. It's risky not to diversify your early round picks, right? And that's kind of what I was saying. If they're all the same, you're not doing anything to necessarily gain an edge. You're just introducing more risk and more variance. But more variance and more risk can create a payoff if that risk hits, right? Yeah. You also have that risk of ruin. You could literally go to 0 in best ball. Mm-hmm. But I think that's a personal risk preference approach. He's saying, it's very risky, not necessarily that rewarding. That's the difficult part is it can be very rewarding, right? Because the results are so binary, right? If we get the Justin Jefferson outcome versus Ja'Marr Chase last year, Justin Jefferson was great for the whole regular season. His advance rate was great, but he tanked in the playoffs. He was the highest owned player in the finals. He was horrible. What did he have? 2 catches or something like that.
I think week 15 he was great, but then I think 16, 17, 16 he was fine, and then the championship game he was like a ghost on the field. Completely did not show up for that game.
Yep, he was on 2 of my 3 finals teams, so I remember it quite clearly. quite clear. Jalen Hurts, injured. Justin Jefferson, goose egg. The finals last year were an epic shit show. But let's talk a little bit about that second half of the first round. I think that'll bleed into kind of our second and third round picks. I do agree that I think that the first round, I'm going to pull up the ADP. But what's your just general first gut takes kind of beyond that top 5 and in the second half of the first round?
I actually really like, as much as I hate drafting in the middle of drafts, like it's kind of the bane of my existence. I really hate that 6, 7, 8, 9 range when I'm drafting. But in fairness, you're still getting Stephon Diggs. You're getting AJ Brown. To Travis's point, if you like Bijan in that range, you can get them in that range and still get some decent, wide receivers on the comeback for the middle of the second round. And Travis is kind of right. I'm not fading Bijan, but I'm not salivating at the mouth when like everybody else is to get Bijan Robinson. I love when someone comes up and takes him 4th overall and I'm behind that player. I'm like, great. That just gives me one of these other guys that I really want, another shot on goal for them. So to me, it's AJ Brown quite a bit in that range. I think I'm AJ Brown over Diggs, but that's one of those razor thin ones where I'll still probably grab Diggs before Brown a lot just to get my exposure on both players around where I want it. But that range is great. That's the cup range too, right? Like it's a phenomenal range. That first 6, 7, 8 picks is way better than the first 8 picks last year. There was a top 5 last year. It does feel like, I know there are different tiers in the top 8, 9 players this year, but there does feel like a top 9. And then it craters at that Devontae Adams line. That Devontae Eckler Taylor line is where everything looks like it's this big tier separation versus like a minuscule one for the players before that. I'm not sure how you feel about that.
Yeah, I think so too. This is one of those, have to separate your football takes from and the results of this player's career from what you kind of believe in what he projects in this upcoming season. And I think when you get to Devontae Adams, 10th overall, we're kind of just throwing him in there because of his track record and because he's an awesome football player. And he was awesome again last year. But it stuck out to me. Friend of the show, Tom, I'm going to screw up your name, so I totally apologize. But our friend from across the pond, Tom Strachan, I believe is his last name. He posted a really interesting tweet today that really kind of summarized my concerns with Davante Adams being that Jimmy Garoppolo is now the quarterback. I think everybody probably knows my thoughts on Jimmy that has watched this show before. If you are tuning in for the first time, not a Jimmy G fan, not a Jimmy G fan at all in terms of a real life football player or for fantasy. He's now the quarterback. Davante Adams over the last, it was 4 or 5 years, has what Tom classified as like a deep target. I don't remember what the yardage number was, right? At 25, 30 yards down the field. It was averaging like 30 plus deep targets a season. Some wide receivers barely get 30 targets. This dude's getting 30 plus 30-yard targets a season. He's a downfield player. I know he's awesome everywhere, but he really makes his hay down the field for fantasy. Jimmy Garoppolo has never thrown more than 30 deep targets in a season total to all of his wide receivers.
Kind of impressive.
I don't even know how you play that long without throwing the ball down the field ever. But Davante averages basically more deep targets than Jimmy has ever thrown in a season in his career. So we have a kind of a convergence of very opposing styles from the new quarterback with this superstar wide receiver. You combine it with the fact that they just removed all of the downfield juice in the entire offense besides Davante, right? They brought in Jacoby Myers, and they still have Hunter Renfrow and then a rookie tight end. I just have general concerns about Davante, and we have this big tier, in my opinion, after I kind of put Bijan much closer to that tier than I do. I think we're just pushing Bijan up because of everything we talked about with the top X amount of picks where nobody really knows what to do after Kelce and Kupp. It's like, of course, we like Diggs, we like Brown. I prefer those two guys, but it's like, well, Bijan should probably smash, right? He's one of the best running back prospects ever. Looks, top 10 pick, looks great. So let's just lump him in here. But I think kind of all these guys have their varying levels of concerns, and I'll probably still take some Bijan just because I'm not going to be stubborn about it, even though I'm probably a little lower than market. He's ranked a little lower than market in the Spike Week rankings. But Davante is where I start to really struggle with these guys. And I've started to consider pulling up Eckler, pulling up whether it's JT or Saquon or someone like that, and pulling those guys up a little bit into that back half of the first round. It could be Pollard. It could be some of these other wide receivers, right? We scroll down the list just a smidge. You see Amon-Ra, who I also don't totally love on Underdog, but the same thing, I'm not going to be super stubborn about him because of this tier. I just think this is where the draft gets really, really interesting, kind of beyond Diggs and AJ Brown, because everybody, I can see the bull case for all these guys, Eckler, Davante, JT, Garrett Wilson, etc. But I could make a very strong argument against all these guys as well. So this is where I think things get a little hairy, if you will, in the top 3 rounds.
I agree. And my question for you is, we kind of talked about this real quickly yesterday. So what I've been doing a little bit of, not every time, is that 10th, 11th, 12th pick. I just go off the board sometimes, quote unquote, off the board, meaning I'm scrolling down to like Amon-Ra or one of the quarterbacks or Pollard. And I'm like, well, what if I want Barkley Pollard or something like that? Like if I want to start running back, maybe I want a Barkley Pollard because no one else is really doing it. Or what if I want Chubb Pollard, right? We talk about how great Chubb and Pollard are in the back of the second round. I know Taylor profiles a little bit better than those two theoretically, but to me, that's apples to apples right there. They're right in that same basket. So when you're getting like a Chubb Pollard thing that no one else is trying to do because they're like, oh, well, he goes late second round, I can't take him here. Why can't you? Why can't you in that spot? We're not talking about leaping them up over, CMC or Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson. We're talking guys that probably have a same or close projection as them, and now you're getting gigantic leverage on the field, right? So why not do stuff like that? So it's what I've been flirting with quite a bit in some of these cheaper tournaments, but I think it's going to bleed over to the higher buy-in stuff, like the 25s and the 20s and the $10, like the main tournaments. And hell, I'm going to be doing a little bit more of the big buy-in stuff this year. I might even do it there if I get a late round pick, because then I have a gigantic leverage, because
even less total teams,
right.
with those combinations. Yep.
Yeah, and if I get a Chubb Pollard team through, or like a Amon-Ra Chubb team through, who the hell else is going to have that team? Feels great, right? So that's kind of what I'm looking at the late first round. That is going to be one of like my staples this year.
Exactly what Bucks said. The late draft pick, it does feel right. You feel like you got to dig out of a hole to catch up to the, again, depending upon how you feel about Kelsey, AJ Brown, Diggs, Bijan. You have the 10, 11, 12 pick. You feel like you are chasing points, you know what I mean, against those top guys, because they are so much better. And what actually had it's funny, we didn't know that we were going to talk about this today, and then we had an awesome there was a great conversation last night in the Discord, which of course, again, if you're not in there, there's a link to our free Discord in the description of this video. We talked about basically this exact situation where you get to this part of the draft and the unique combos. This is, again, if you're watching on YouTube or if you're listening to the audio, you see a sicko emblem at the top here. These are the kinds of things that we're going to be talking about on this channel. We're going to be diving into the really kind of sick strategies that are a little bit more off the board, as opposed to just sticking to ADP and taking the same combinations at the 1-2 turn that everyone else is doing, right? Oh, you took Devontae, and then who lines up with Devontae? Amon-Ra, right? You take Devontae, Amon-Ra, Devontae, Saquon, JT, Garrett Wilson. You take the same combination of players that everyone else takes there. It is, if that tier, if you maybe you like these guys more than we do, there's someone in this, right? You say, no, I don't agree with you about Devontae. He's definitely better. Or I think Garrett Wilson is definitely better. That's totally fine. But if you agree with us that there's this gigantic tier, which to me, let's just for argument's sake, let's just say it goes down to Devonta Smith. Let's say T is the next tier. I'm just using that as a reference point.
Yeah.
We go from Devontae at 10 to Devonta Smith at 24 overall, right? So there's more than an entire round of players that are the same. So at that point, if you agree that they are all the same, they're the same bet, it is basically a free roll to say, I'm going to take the guys that no one else is taking together at that point, because they're all the same. Why would I take the same, right? If 10% of teams are all going to be this one combination and 1% of teams are going to be the combination of the other, and all the players are the same, right? I like to call them chess pieces. They're all knights. These are all knights on your chessboard. I want the two knights that nobody's using together, right? As opposed to using the same knights that everyone else is using together, because there's no loss. I'm not losing projection. I'm not losing upside. I'm only gaining uniqueness over everybody else. And these are the, people, some, and myself included, sometimes will maybe misuse the uniqueness idea or whatever. But these are the uniqueness situations where it matters. Flat tier, everybody's the same. If you're just going to take guys in the same tier, take the guys that no one is taking together, just like you said. So let's pull Pollard up a little bit, right? Let's take Saquon and Pollard at the 1-2 turn. I got the 11th pick or the 12th pick. Like Saquon versus JT is no different to me. I would probably make a case that Saquon might be better. You could. And Pollard versus JT, frankly, is not that different. So if they're not that different, let's figure out how to find these combinations of those guys that are just not going to be as popular as the other ones. And it's generally, right, let's take one guy kind of ahead of ADP and then another guy, just in a range where they just never go together. And in a little bit, we'll pull up, we can obviously show you our models projections for how often players are drafted together. But I think that's the big lesson for me specifically here. We talked about the first round. We talked about the top 5. We talked about the nuance of the whole draft. This part of the top 3 rounds, like that whole flat tier is the story to me.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's the flat tier, and I think that is the conversation for the second round, is how do you get slightly unique, or how do you develop your strategy for your roster going forward through the second round? Because I think it just, I mean, it's kind of a cop out to say this lays out the rest of your draft, because of course it does, right? Every year it's going to lay out the rest of your draft. But when I say it, I mean it in terms of what's going to happen in the next 4 rounds, because after the next 4 rounds, it feels like a bunch of dart throws at the moment. So you really need to get these first 3 rounds right so that you can get the next 4 rounds right, so that then you can just start throwing your darts all around the board, basically, for the most part. And that's not 100% true for every single spot, but for the most part, I think round 7, round 8 comes up, you're starting to throw some darts, and there's some darts that we really want to throw. For me, it's like Alexander Madison, like in that 7th, 8th round range, Tony. But I am aware that those are still massive dart throws. We're still throwing darts there. So,
yep, 100%. And that's the part of kind of what we talked about with that top 5 is like, we all have our guys, right? But and that's good. It's okay to have guys that you prefer and conviction about players, and again, going to the fun and going to right. Like, dude, I'm not going to draft. Look, I'm trying to win. I'm trying to find all these edges and all that. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to draft a bunch of dudes that I don't want to draft, like, and put all my money into this if I'm not going to have as much fun. Right? The whole Gabe thing, the Darrington, right? I drafted a bunch of Darrington fucking Evans. I was like, I was literally DMing Darrington on Twitter. I was trying to find his like manager and agent and stuff, because he's a streamer. He streams video games, but I'm like, like that it was fun. It was a fun bit. So I'm willing to put my money behind that. But like, I was also well aware Darrington versus Samaje Perine was no different. It wasn't any different. I just enjoyed that more. But you also have to be able to acknowledge that, right? Like you said, I prefer Tony too. I really like Tony as well this year, but I'm also willing to acknowledge that, like, that doesn't mean necessarily that Tony is a better bet than Deontay, right? If someone said I prefer Deontay, I would say fine. That's totally fine. And so that's just a big thing to kind of keep in mind. I do want to hit Goblor asks, has anyone analyzed the finals teams to see how often low-owned start combos showed up? So part of this is a sampling issue. It's a little bit of the chicken or the egg thing. If no one is drafting the low-owned combos, right, any combination of player is already unlikely to show up. And if there's almost none of those teams in the whole drafted pool, it's hard to draw from the results. You know what I mean? That's why we're trying to project it forward a little bit and talking about the flat tiers and where this matters and stuff. So I would guess that there's some I haven't dug into this, to be fair, but I would guess that there are some forms of unique combinations that show up there to the finals, but it's very difficult to kind of go back and re-engineer that process.
And it's hard to get to the finals. You got to remember that it is hard to get to the finals. What we're looking at is getting to the playoffs, and you're facing everyone that has Jefferson, Tony Pollard, right? Like that's the combo they went for. But your Tony Pollard is paired with Saquon Barkley, and you're the only one in your pod that has that. So yeah, you can just X out Tony Pollard because he was like, let's just say he's the guy you needed, right? Just Pollard was the guy you needed. But everyone had him with Jefferson because they went first. Jefferson, they did the standard strategy. But here you are with Saquon Pollard. You already have a extreme advantage. If Jefferson busts and half the field has Jefferson Pollard, or like a quarter even, you've already vaulted over like those 4 teams most likely because your combination is better. Now, everybody can bust. There is those elements too. But you're just looking for that edge, right? Well, we'll go back to the finals 2 years ago. Everyone had Mark Andrews. Mark Andrews busted in the finals. So it's not the same comparison. I'm just stating when everybody has something and it busts and you're the one who's different, your odds just go up like tremendously versus those players.
It's so I'm gonna this article, and shout out to Hacker for helping me with the data on this article, is actually kind of talking about what you just talked about and what we've talked about here with the unique combinations. And it was from 2 years ago. The premise was, as you see here, double stacking expensive offenses as the playoff leverage. But the same thing actually rings true in terms of the player combinations, because that's all it was. Super long story short, this was a fun article to write, and I think it was really thought provoking. So go give it a read if you get a second. But the general thesis was, if you remember, again, 2 years ago, Jamar Chase was the guy you needed. And it wasn't the Mike Evans guy you needed where nobody had him, but he was low owned, relatively speaking, in the final. Let me find the data here. So in week 17, Joe Burrow was 16%, as you see here. Joe Burrow was 16%. Ja'Marr Chase was 6%. So 10 or 15 teams, give or take, with Ja'Marr Chase in that final, a little smaller final 2 years ago. And T, because T exploded in week 16, T was the week 16 guy you needed, exploded. He was 25%. He was one of the highest owned players in the finals. So you say, okay, well, how do I use that to my advantage? You say, well, no one was drafting the Bengals double stacks, as we see down here. Total draft rate of Burrow plus Chase plus T, 0.7% of the entire Best Ball Mania, what was that, 2, had that double stack. So you show up to the final, right? The Burrow Chase team, or the Burrow Higgins stack, allowed you to get Ja'Marr Chase into the final because you didn't need his score. T was the wide receiver 1 and Burrow was the quarterback 1 in week 16. They got you through into that final. Now you show up with a 6% owned Ja'Marr Chase, and boom, because nobody drafted that combination, bam, Joe Burrow, again, week 17, quarterback 1, Ja'Marr Chase, wide receiver 1, league winner. I know Liam didn't have that, but this is part of we can't just go look at the results because nobody had this. There was 1 out of 160 finals teams with Burrow, Chase, and T, right? And so they just didn't have the rest to get, they didn't have all the other players that got them there, Penny, Amon-Ra, etc. But this is it. This is that example. It's all you had to do was draft that one unique combination, and honestly, the rest took care of itself. All you had to do was do that and get lucky on Rashad Penny, Damian Harris. Boom, dude, you have you're live as hell to win this whole tournament. And so it's one example. Is it likely to play out again? Is it ever likely to? Is anything ever likely to play out? No, of course not. But we're drafting a bunch of teams, and we should be thinking about these things because when it's right, I want to win the fucking tournament. When I'm right, I want to get there, and this builds in that leverage. It built it in. You didn't have to plan for it because you can't. But you don't have to figure this stuff out. If you draft that combination and it hits, the leverage is off the charts, and you have 6% owned Ja'Marr Chase in the finals, right? And you just automatically have massive leverage, and you're automatically live to win that $3 million this year.
And it's crazy because I was trying to rack my brain and try to remember where they were getting drafted that year. I think T was a 3rd or 4th round pick. I know Chase was going about the 5th round, and Burrow was
Chase fell because he couldn't catch the ball in the preseason. Remember?
Right. He went from a 5th to a 6th, then back up to a 5th, and Burrow was going 9th. So you could have got that double stack. Imagine if I said, all right, you can get Ja'Marr Chase, T Higgins, and Joe Burrow for a 3rd, 5th, and 9th. You'd be like, sign me up for 150, baby, because I'm getting it on every single team. I'll take it for every roster. Thank you. Goodbye. So yeah, I think it is pretty important in terms of just getting the unique combinations. When you get to the finals, people are going to have a lot of the same combos.
Especially now, the finals are huge, man. Yeah. So if that, you mentioned Mark Andrews, that year, Justin Jefferson was the highest owned player last year. So even if he is the guy, right, it's okay. You want to draft good players. If you drafted Justin Jefferson last year, no one is saying don't draft the guy that's the best player in fantasy. That's absurd. No one's saying don't draft Josh, this year's Josh Jacobs, which is Damian Harris, by the way. But we are saying, if you do draft Justin Jefferson, right, you were right. You got the team. How do you draft to help set you up to win that final? And these are just little things, right, that you can do across your entire portfolio. And that second round, to me, like we've talked about, that's the biggest area that you can kind of flex that muscle in all of best ball drafts right now.
Yeah, I think there's different ways to do it with different players. The top of the first round, you might decide to do something different in the 5th. You might like 2 5th round picks. And we're going back 2 years again. The 5th round wide receivers 2 years ago were sick. I loved them. It was both Bucs wide receivers. It was Cooper Kupp. I'll be fair. It was Robert Woods in there too, because we were trying to figure that out. It was Ja'Marr Chase. We liked those 5 wide receivers a lot. And it might have even been DJ Moore if I remember correctly.
Correct.
So a lot of teams didn't have two of those wide receivers. And there was a lot of fourth round wide receivers that we were like kind of on in third rounds. Allen Robinson. Even that year, we were like, we kind of like Allen Robinson. So you were just tapping him because he was there. But towards the end of the year, I was like, well, I kind of want unique combos of these wide receivers in the fifth round. So I started pushing some of them up my board. And I didn't check the data on which teams advanced, but I guarantee it helped quite a bit to have like a Cooper Kupp, Jamar Chase team, because it was probably very much not done too often, maybe when he fell into the six, but it's just, you find these little pockets of teams that you like. So if you took Justin Jefferson and you find that there's guys in the fifth round that you like a lot and you want two of them, move them up to the fourth. Who cares? Like, again, I don't think there's a massive difference in projection at that point with some of these players. So if you like two of those players, take them. There's your differentiation, right? With your Justin Jefferson team.
Lion says, do you calculate how many points your advanced but eliminated teams would have scored in the finals? That would create more data to estimate the value add of building a team for the finals.
That's Max Payne. That's just
totally hurts. I totally respect the thesis of what you're saying, but I value my sanity and my mental health. And the last thing I want to do is go look at that team that lost by 1 point in week 16 and watch and see that it would have won.
Nope. Can't do it. I can't do it. I have an NBA best ball team right now that I would I think in probably most pods would definitely be advancing. And I've sat there and flirted with asking to see some of the other people's pods to see how I would be doing. And I'm like, I can't do it because I'm going to cry because this team is so solid right now and scoring so many points. And if it would have advanced in every other pod, I'm going to be sick. So I don't even want to know. Like, it's just, if it doesn't advance, that team's dead to me. I don't want to see it ever again. And we're done. That is some like,
that is dark.
Massive.
His name is Lie in the Dark, and that is some dark shit.
Yeah, I mean, that is like, that's like the stuff where you like to hurt yourself. That is the maximum definition of that. Like, I could never do it. Like, if you ever had a team that missed by a point but would have won week 17 and you know it, I'd be vomiting.
So can I tell a story about I still to this day think about this. So was it 2 years ago was the first year Lamar got hurt and Tyler Huntley came in and started for him. And that's when 2 years ago, Andrews blows up. Andrews blows up right down the stretch. The Ravens defense collapsed, right? Like, the Ravens defense was an absolute abomination. They were just getting torched by everyone. So I made the DraftKings NFL Live Final. It's $2.5 million to first place. We're sitting there that morning. Lamar is questionable. They play an afternoon game. There's no late swap at the Live Final. You have to lock in your team before the noon games or 1 o'clock on the East Coast games start, and you can't swap. So you can't wait for like Lamar injury news, right? I had two teams that I was deciding between, and one of them was Cardinals are playing the Lions. Because the Live Final is week 16, not week 17. So I had two miserable, painful losses back to back because Pete and I got 8th in Best Ball Mania the next week, and then this. But so I had a Cardinals stack, a game stack of that. I actually played Amon-Ra on that team. Christian Kirk had a really, really good team. And my other team, Green Bay, was playing the Ravens, and it was a Huntley Andrews stack. I was playing Devontae regardless. I was actually playing MVS too. I was basically stacking those two games on both teams, but I had Gesicki on the Kyler and the Arizona team. And I had so Kyler Gesicki essentially was the 2v2. I think there was one other guy versus Huntley and Andrews. So Huntley has the greatest game of his career. He scored like 35 fantasy points. Andrews did the Andrews thing, like 150 yards and 3 touchdowns or whatever. Mike Gesicki scored like 8 fantasy points, and the Cardinals got the absolute shit beat out of them by the Lions, and Kyler got benched for the fourth quarter. I was sitting there on that Huntley team, and I just I just couldn't pull the trigger because I didn't know. I'm like, the last thing I want to do is come to this event, got a chance for multiple millions of dollars, and play a backup quarterback who doesn't even actually play today, right? And so I'm like, I'm just not going to do it. Then Jay Glazer announces 3 minutes before lock, Lamar's out. And I'm sitting in the hotel room with my buddy who came with me, and I'm like, what do you think? Like, it's also, I trust Jay Glazer, but like, that's not a total guarantee. We don't have the injury report, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, if I swap and Kyler wins it, I'll be sick to my stomach. And so I didn't swap. And if I had swapped, I would have won.
You would have won it.
I would have won $2.5 million. In fairness, we probably wouldn't be here today had I won the live final. So, we'll take a glass half full. But Lion in the Dark says, like, do it for the content. That sticks with me to this. We're talking like, almost 1,000 days or something that it's been, and it still sticks with me to this day. I could not do that to myself ever again, like intentionally do that to myself.
Yeah. Mine's not quite the same thing, but my one gambling memory that just killed me is I was in a satellite to play in the main event of the World Series, which is like always been one of my big dreams about 10 years ago. And we were down to, I think, 12 players. I think 7 people were going. And I had like a marginal stack. I had to double. Folds around to the small blind. He shoves. I look down at ace queen suited. Pretty easy snap call. Our stacks were about the same. He had a little more than me, not much more. I table ace queen suited. He tables ace 8. Flop comes 8-8-3. And I'm just like, sick, like literally sick. I have this dude yelling how he deserves it in my ear, like, and I literally got home and I vomited in the front yard because I was so upset over it. Like, I was that upset. So if you think I'm gonna sit here and calculate if I would have won a tournament, absolutely never. You can fire me, Eric. I'm never taking a week 16 team and seeing if it would have won. I'm just not doing it ever.
And to be fair, we do a lot of self-torture for the content. It's just it's just like physical pain, right? Like, we ate a bunch of hot dogs or ate a bunch of spicy wings, but I can't do the mental anguish. Like, I'll get over the sickness from the hot dog. I'll never get over the mental anguish.
Never. If I knew I could have been a millionaire and like, that would kill me. It would just like, my soul would leave my body.
So let's wrap with kind of some of this third round talk, because obviously we're talking about the first 3 rounds and we pretty much diagnosed the first 2. The third round definitely does get interesting, where I'll lead and then kind of pass it over to you. I think that we talked about, let's just say that T Higgins is kind of where, because he is right at that 2-3 turn, is a tier break, however you would like to say. I do still really like T Higgins. From a wide receiver perspective, I think DK Metcalf is a tier break for me. And so this is something, again, you don't have to agree with that, but I think from DK Metcalf down to Debo and Calvin, I know you really like Calvin Ridley, but I just think that there's a level of uncertainty that exists with Calvin Ridley that's not the same with these other top guys. And like, not that he can't be awesome, but like, I know DK Metcalf is awesome. And so it's just a little bit easier. Say whatever you want about, I know we've talked about Breece. We don't need to talk about him anymore, but I think, and I really hate Derrick Henry, but Josh Jacobs and get to Ramondre. And I think that's a tier break as well. I also probably argue Lamar is a tier break at quarterback, but moral of the story being, you get to this range, this Ramondre, DK Metcalf-ish range. That's still not even halfway through the third round, excuse me. So you're halfway through the third round. And if you're in the back half of that third round, it's, again, why is the late pick so shitty? Is because not only do you get it worse in the first and the second round, you get it worse in the third round too. And so how are you thinking about this third round are you kind of in agreement on that tier? And then how are you just kind of thinking about the third round?
Well, DK Metcalf is a tier break, but he's also his own tier for me at wide receiver.
Yeah. I would agree with that. Yeah.
So like, T Higgins is like the tier break for me with like the Devonta Smith, T Higgins, and then there's DK Metcalf, and then it's Calvin Ridley, Debo Samuel, and those guys. So it will always be DK over those guys, and then it's the Calvin Ridley, Amari Cooper, those guys right there. Mark Andrews, I've already said I'm not drafting him this year just based on I don't want to invest in the tight end spot that early. And I think Lamar, I kind of have him and Fields in a tier together a bit. I lean Lamar, obviously. But I think there's guys in the third round that I'm just fading. I'm just kind of fading Josh Jacobs this year for multiple reasons. I don't even hate Josh Jacobs the way other people do. It's just I don't like the capital that you have to invest in him. I'd rather have Ramondre. I'd rather have Travis Etienne. I'd rather have the Jags offense. The interesting one in this, I mean, we're fading Najee. We all know that. We don't have to dive into that. The interesting one is Jahmyr Gibbs right now, who's rocketing up into the third round. I'm probably not taking him on Underdog, but I will still take him on DraftKings. I will still take him on Drafters, right? So the third round is where I really start to take some stands on some guys, and we're going to start seeing when we start doing these drafts with the draft overlay, the draft hacker, you're going to start seeing some higher ownership percentages on a couple of these guys, and some of them 0 to, under 5%, sub 5%, because I'm not taking them as much. And even I like Justin Fields, but because I'm taking the early quarterbacks, my Justin Fields exposure is going to be lower because I'm not going to take him on the teams with the higher end quarterbacks. So that's kind of what I'm looking at right now.
I think that makes sense. I definitely haven't honestly really honed in. What I will say for me, because of that tier break, I really have no issues with honestly fading almost any of these guys in this third round. But because of this kind of tier break here, where I have highlighted from Ramondre on down, and to be clear, Derrick Henry is not in this tier for me, but I understand that he goes there by ADP. But it's kind of because also Derrick Henry goes here. Like I remove him, I have Breece lower than these other guys, and so I am just going to kind of take some Josh Jacobs, but to that very original conversation we had before, I really want to be wide receiver heavy in this range right here. If I can, right? If they're all gone, it creates a different thing. I might dip my toes in the Lamar waters. I'm pretty bullish on Lamar. I'm pretty excited for Lamar. I might dip my toes in there. And then I will also do exactly what we talked about in the second round, where like if I have a second half of the third round, a pick, I'm going to do the same thing or consider doing the same thing where I think all these guys are the same. Debo, Ridley, Gibbs, Amari, Fields, DJ Moore, Ken Walker, Andrews versus Hawkinson. We talked about that on the show recently, that they're literally right next to each other for me. So when I get to this group and the Ramondre on up is gone, I am going to again look to who isn't right. Let's move down the list a little bit and then take the two guys that go right next to each other, right? Jahmyr Gibbs and Amari Cooper, DJ Moore and I'm not saying whether you like DeAndre Hopkins or not, right? I'm just going to, play around with that as well. Do the exact same thing here because if you think the second round tier is big, dude, we could make a case that this next tier is like absolutely massive. Like what's the difference between like George Kittle versus I prefer TJ Hawkinson, but like if you wanted to make a case George Kittle is better than TJ Hawkinson, would I really argue with you that much? If you wanted to make a case that Terry McLaurin was better than DeAndre Hopkins, would I argue with like no? So there's just all of these guys. So I'm kind of considering doing the same thing here, but I don't have like I was really passionate about honestly the first round and the second round conversation. I think in this third round is where it's kind of a little bit of dealer's choice. It's kind of a little bit of you show up to the buffet, you want sushi and I want a cheeseburger or or whatever. And we all pick what we want here. But I think that's sometimes I think that's people being stubborn and being like, I just like that guy. The Levitan IKB, I know better when you don't know better. But in this range, I think is a spot you can do it, right? Like that's why I don't like the Jag stack as much as you do, but why I've never pushed back on it once is not because of anything about the Jags. It's because you get to this point and I'm like, so he likes Ridley better. What's the fucking difference between Ridley and anybody else here? And so that's context. Like I think Gibbs is probably my favorite guy here, but like on underdog, there's flaws to Gibbs there on underdog, right? DJ Moore, I really, obviously, shocker, another year of liking DJ Moore. But like, again, DJ Moore on the Bears on underdog, is it that great? Is it better than anybody else? Not really. So I think this is the spot where like you really want to sink your teeth in and be like, this is where I'm going to, take my stand on somebody. I do think you can do it right here.
I think that's a good point. And the other 2 points that I will end this on, because I have a pre-show meet in 4 minutes. Yep. I think this is a perfect range if you don't have a quarterback yet to set up some stacks for later in the draft. And I also think we just went into this double stack talk, and I know some people are going to put their nose and pinch their nose and shake their head at this, but if you wanted to take Mike Williams in the 3rd, right, to get Keenan Allen in the 4th, especially if it's on DraftKings or something, to set up the Justin Herbert double stack that no one's really going to have because they're all like ADP adjacent right now, you can set up the Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, Justin Herbert, and you'll probably get it enough because people will just let Herbert fall without one of the other 2 guys. And even if they don't, who cares? Like now you just have those 2 wide receivers, right? So I think that's another thing. I'm going to do that occasionally. I'm not going to do it frequently, but when I do that, it will be on Drafters or DraftKings specifically, I would assume, because that's where I like Keenan Allen on those 2 sites. So
yeah, yep, I totally agree. And we do have to get out of here. I'm just going to really quickly run through this last couple comments because I don't want to leave you guys hanging, and we appreciate you guys dropping in the comments. I found Felix's burner, lazy fish breeder. Brian agrees with us on worried about regression in Vegas. I am extremely worried about that for every single Raider. That's why you mentioned the Josh Jacobs thing. I have no arguments about that. I talked about Devontae, KZ. That was ADP, not rankings, not rankings. So don't worry about that. Cobra Kai talks about exactly what we said. He's even talking about from pick 34 to 60. There is really not that much different, and I wouldn't even make an argument for that. Either. And then D-Web asks, are you taking Lamar at the 2-3 turn? For me, it's too early, just because I do still think there's a tier break after him, and you can get him after that tier break whenever you want, almost, relatively speaking, right? Sometimes he's a late 3rd round pick, so you're going to get him the whole back half of the 3rd round. So I'm not going to force it over T and Devonta Smith and Ramondre. I'm not personally not yet. I'm not forcing it.
It might come to that, but not yet.
Exactly. And agree with Josh. Go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. No show tomorrow, but we do have another video coming out. And I just wanted to say, from a housekeeping perspective, whether you are an advanced best ball player or a new best ball player, I just posted the first article in a new series called How to Win at Best Ball. This specific article is about mastering the rules. And I really think it's going to be a really good series for no matter if you're brand new to best ball, seasoned, or even kind of an expert. It has helped me, and I literally started a best ball company 2 years ago, so I'm really deep in the weeds. But I think that this series will be really helpful, and Rob is going to help me put some videos out on kind of a how to win at best ball 101 type series. So those will be coming as well here very, very, very shortly on the YouTube channel. Rob, anything before you send us out of here?
Nope, that's it for me. I can't believe the Celtics are garbage, and I'm getting very angry.
That's how I feel. We talked last night. I said, all I need is the Warriors to win. All I need is the Warriors to win. And then they literally just shit the bed in the final couple minutes. Thanks for joining us, guys. We will see you on Thursday. We'll be back. We'll be back on Thursday. We will see you on Thursday. Peace.
Woo! Those were some spicy takes. Want to stay up to date with all of the other spicy takes we're going to have over here at Spike Week? Why don't you press that subscribe button below? You turn notifications on, we draft a team, boom, you know about it. We have another spicy take, boom, you know about it. You can be there. You can draft with us. You want to stay up to date? That's how you do it. All right, we'll catch you later next time here at Spike Week.